The first apocalypse took place in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Northern Virginia. It was caused by a 5-year-old girl named Sarah Rogers, an unassuming student just starting her first year of kindergarten. She also happened to be my daughter. The first domino to fall was because of a woman named Miss Erickson. Miss Erickson was Sarah's homeroom teacher, a lonely, middle-aged woman who harbored enduring obsessions with two things: the army of stray cats that besieged her home year-round, and the Christmas season. Because of the latter obsession, Miss Erickson decided that she would begin her Christmas lessons a little early that year, in mid-September. The first lesson involved students writing letters to Santa Claus. Harmless, right? Well, I certainly thought so at first. But, as Miss Erickson's enthusiasm for teaching has never quite matched her enthusiasm for cats and candy cane-flavored liquor, the students' letters got sent out with some spelling errors. As far as I can tell, though, my daughter is the only one who sent her letter out to Satan. That shouldn't have been a problem. Just another funny anecdote to add to the highlight reel of stories that make up any normal childhood. The problem was that we got a letter back. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon, and I was drifting off to sleep in my recliner when I was startled from my reverie by an urgent knock at the door. I pushed myself out of the chair to go see who was there and what they could possibly have needed that was so important. Yet, when I opened the door, I was greeted only by an empty porch. I leaned out and scanned the street. The sky was blue and cloudless, and the neighborhood was uncharacteristically quiet for the time of day. Usually, on a Sunday afternoon, there would be kids chasing each other around, or perhaps somebody working on their car. At the very least, Miss Mickelhattie would be out walking her dog to let it relieve itself on her least favorite neighbor's lawns. Yet the street was still and silent. I glanced down at my doormat and saw a charcoal black envelope. I bent down and picked it up, staring at it as I carried it inside my house. The envelope was cartoonishly large and smelled faintly of sulfur. Sarah, my daughter's name, was written on the front in blood red ink. My first instinct was to wonder what kind of person would hand-deliver a letter to a 5-year-old girl. Turning the envelope over, I slid my thumb under the seal and tore it open. I pulled the letter inside out with care. It looked to be at least 100 years old and seemed like it might crumble in my hands at any moment. The penmanship was loopy cursive, written with the same blood red ink that was on the envelope. I felt a growing sense of unease in the pit of my stomach as I read the letter, the contents of which I will replicate for you here. Dear Sarah, thank you so much for your letter. Almost nobody takes time to write to me anymore. I usually only get letters from Satanists, and they are an awfully strange group of people. I have carefully considered your request for a life-size living teddy bear, and I believe that our scientists down here in hell have been able to put together a reasonable approximation of your request. Frank and Teddy is scheduled to arrive at your doorstep shortly after you receive this letter. Yours truly, Satan. I must have looked rather stupid as I stood there staring at the letter in my hands, my mouth hanging open as I tried to put my thoughts in order. Yet, I wager I looked even stupider when I turned around to see a 7-foot-tall teddy bear standing behind me, and I screamed like a little girl. Frank and Teddy seemed unfazed by my reaction, and, judging by his appearance, I'd guess that he was used to such a reception. He had matted brown fur that was patched together with various bits of ragged cloth, and covered in what looked suspiciously like bloodstains. One of his eyes was a little black button, and the other one looked like a glowing ember set somewhere deep in the back of his head. He spoke in a booming, monotonous baritone that made me wonder if his vocal cords had been singed by hellfire. I am Franken Teddy, he bellowed, and I am here to love you. I tried to force my mouth to form words, but all that came out was a small squeaking noise. "Are you Sarah?" Frank and Teddy bellowed. No, I'm Sarah's dad. Listen, I don't really think that." "Where is Sarah?" interrupted Frank and Teddy. "Well, she's at school right now, and then I will go to school so that I may love her." "Oh, wait a second. School's over now and she'll be home any moment, but you can't." "Then I shall wait here," Frank and Teddy finished. He promptly turned around and made his way to my couch. The couch groaned and sagged under his enormous weight. He turned toward me. "Do you have any souls of the damned? I must consume souls of the damned to sustain myself." No, I'm afraid we don't," I replied. He made a vague grumbling noise in his throat and said, "Cheetos are also fine." "Oh, well, we do have those." "I'll help myself." I looked back down at the letter as Frank and Teddy wandered into my kitchen and saw that there was a customer service number written on the back. I got out my phone to call it, but before I finished dialing, I heard a scream sound out from behind me. I turned around to see Sarah standing in the doorway, mouth hanging open, as she stared at Frank and Teddy rummaging through our cabinets and throwing things on the floor in his search for Cheetos. "Sarah, honey, don't be scared," I said, trying to take my own advice. But Sarah wasn't scared at all. She shot past me like a bolt of little blonde lightning and leapt on Frank and Teddy's leg, wrapping herself so tightly around it that she was lifted off the ground whenever he took a step. "He's perfect, Daddy. I can't wait to take him to show and tell." I was flabbergasted. "Wait, really?" "Of course." "Oh, but you can't bring a monster teddy bear to—" "Are you Sarah?" Frank and Teddy's booming voice cut me off yet again. "Yes," Sarah shouted. Frank and Teddy took a knee. "My lady, I have been enlisted by the Dark Lord Satan to serve at your pleasure. I shall love and protect you with my life, and inflict the horrors of a demonic legion on your enemies." "Cool!" Sarah shouted. She leapt to her feet and began hopping around Frank and Teddy in circles. Not knowing what else to do, I finished typing the customer service number into my phone with shaking hands. The line rang once, and then a tired female voice answered. "Hell customer service. How may I hell you today?" "Listen, Wait. Did you just say, how may I hell you?" The other voice on the other end sighed. "It's not my joke. It's just something management forces us to say." Okay, listen, I think there's been some sort of mistake." The woman sighed again. "All heaven and hell placements are final. The appeals process is really more of a formality." "What? No, I'm talking about the 7-foot-tall monster teddy bear that just showed up at my house." "Oh," the woman said, her tone relaxing a bit. "You must be the Rogers household." "Yeah, that's right." "Satan wanted to let you know that he hopes your daughter enjoys the gift. He regrets to inform you, however, that he will be out of office until next Wednesday, so he won't be able to check back with you until then." I turned back and watched Frank and Teddy open a family-sized bag of Cheetos and dump its entire contents into his mouth. Several handfuls fell onto the floor, and Sarah trampled them into dust as she hopped around in excitement. "Well, can I maybe return him until then?" "No." "So I'm stuck with a giant monster teddy bear until Satan calls me next week?" "No, of course not," the woman said. "Oh, thank God," I replied. somewhat regretting my phrasing.
Satan won't be calling ya. He has you scheduled for a face-to-face.
My throat tightened up and my mouth went dry. I tried to tell her that wasn't necessary, but all I could get out was a few croaking sounds. She muttered something about rude humans and hung up the phone with a decisive click. I turned back around to see Sarah screaming with laughter as Frank and Teddy tossed her up and into the air and caught her over and over again. Her hair had fallen over her face and her bright blue eyes shone like little aquamarines. I couldn't help but smile a little despite myself. The smile disappeared, however, when I began to think about how I was going to keep a 7-foot-tall teddy bear hidden from the rest of the neighborhood. And that was a relatively small problem compared to deciding what to do when Satan himself showed up on my doorstep. Yet, as I watched Frank and Teddy tear apart my kitchen, the most pressing issue became more clear. I was going to have to buy more Cheetos. Chapter 2. A Demonic Sleepover. My nerves were fried. My hand shook as I set down the empty coffee cup, my fourth one of the night. Frank and Teddy and Sarah sat with their legs splayed out on the living room floor, working on a coloring book. It was 2 a.m. I had tried calling the customer service line over and over again the previous day, only to be put on hold, hung up on, and eventually transferred to a place called the Department of Motor Vehicles and Purgatory Assignations. Finally, I gave up. But I promised myself I would not sleep until I could reach him, and resolved to try again the next morning. For now, all I could do was watch Sarah and Frank and Teddy color. I cleared my throat trying to get their attention. They didn't even look up. I said more loudly. Nothing. I pushed my tired body off the sofa and walked over to the two of them, and tapping Frank and Teddy on the shoulder. "When do you think you might want to go to sleep?" I asked. "Sleep?" said Frank and Teddy, his face a question mark. "You know, that thing where you close your eyes and lay still for about 8 hours?" His face registered no recognition. My eyes strayed to the coloring book, where Cinderella's dress had been filled in with very deep purple crayon, with almost as much color outside the lines as in. She'd also been given a pair of large red horns. "Sarah, I thought you could color all inside the lines now." Sarah's phrase broke into a grin. "That was Frank and Teddy. He's terrible." "These crayons are too small," protested Frank and Teddy. "And they taste like wax." "You're not supposed to eat them," Sarah giggled. Frank and Teddy shrugged his huge shoulders and began clumsy work on a black, spiky tail that poked out of the back of Cinderella's dress. "Even if you don't need sleep, Sarah does, and she's got school tomorrow morning." "I'm too excited to go to sleep, Daddy," protested Sarah. "That may be, but even so, you're going to put on your pajamas, lay in bed, and try." "At least let us finish Cinderella first, then I'll go to bed, I promise." "All the spaces have already been colored in." "Frank and Teddy says she's not done until she has at least 8 other arms." I sighed. "You've already finished 9 other drawings. I let you say it because you were excited, but it's long past time for bed. You two can finish Cinderella after you get back from school tomorrow." My stomach gave a guilty twinge. I'd never lied to Sarah before, but I had no intention of Frank and Teddy still being there by the time she got back home from school the next day. "But Dad, Sarah's next excuse was cut short by a yawn. This seemed to signify that I had won the argument, and so, reluctantly, she packed her crayons back into the box and trudged upstairs to change for bed. I watched her back disappear at the top landing. I then looked back down at Frank and Teddy, who was giving Cinderella an extra pair of insectoid eyes. He must have sensed my gaze, because he turned around to look at me. "Can you teach me how to sleep?" Not tonight. But I desire to learn this human function. In return, I shall teach you how to summon a nightmare creature from the eternal realms of sorrow." I shook my head. "Frank and Teddy, I really don't need to know how to do that. Besides, sleep isn't something that you can teach." "I am a good learner," he insisted. "It only took me an hour to learn how to breathe." "You had to learn how to breathe?" Frank and Teddy nodded. Seeing that he was only going to keep pestering me until I agreed, I relented. "Okay, there's not really that much to it. You just close your eyes, lay down, and let your mind relax. Some people count sheep." "I see. Where do you keep the sheep?" "They're imaginary sheep." "Oh." Frank and Teddy closed his eyes and took a deep breath, then lowered himself onto the carpet. 1, 2, 3, 4. "You count them silently?" "Very well, I see." He laid on the floor for only 10 seconds more, before a huge snore like a broken garbage disposal erupted from his mouth. "Wow, I guess you really are a quick learner," I said. I went back upstairs to find Sarah in her room, already in her pajamas, with the covers up to her neck. The lights had all been turned off, except for the pink princess nightlight that she kept by her bed. I sat down on the side of the mattress and smiled at her. "Did you brush your teeth?" "Yes, Daddy." "Good, then give me a kiss." She sat up and kissed my forehead. "If you brush your teeth, then why does your breath stink?" I teased. "It doesn't stink," she protested. "Honey, it smells like dog breath, and a dog that doesn't brush its teeth at that." Sarah laughed and said, "Okay, fine." She slid off the edge of the bed and trundled off to the bathroom. When I heard the sink go on, she came back in and climbed under the covers, this time smelling like mint. "I'm still not sleepy." "I know, honey, but close your eyes anyway." Sarah closed her eyes, and within a minute, she was lightly snoring, her face relaxed and her little fist clutched around her teddy bear. I bent down and kissed her on the forehead before climbing back down the stairs and resuming my spot on the sofa. I grabbed a book off the shelf, resolving to stay awake until the following morning. I should have chosen a more interesting book, however, because soon I was asleep too. Chapter 3. Welcome to Hell. The next morning was bright and cheery. The birds were singing merrily and giving my very sleep-deprived self a major headache. I finished cooking breakfast and went to wake Sarah up early for school. I sat her down at the dining room table at our usual feast of bacon, eggs, and iced orange juice. Frank and Teddy was still snoring on the living room floor. I looked at Sarah over my glasses, giving her what I hoped was a very stern and impressive look. "I'm going to send you off to school today, like normal," I said. "And I want you to promise me that no matter what, you're not going to say anything to any of your friends about the demonic teddy bear in our living room. Can you do that for me?" Sarah swallowed a mouthful of bacon. "Uh-huh," she said. I held out my hand, and pinky extended. "Pinky promise?" I said. Sarah rolled her eyes and locked her pinky into mine. "I pinky promise." "Good." "Dad?" "Yes?" "Can I go wake up Frank and Teddy now?" "After you finish your breakfast." Sarah grinned and began to attack her plate with the ferocity I'd only seen before on the Discovery Channel. Soon she was finished and streaming into the living room, I watched as she awoke Frank and Teddy by jumping onto his belly. The bear sat up with a start, spilling Sarah off onto the floor. "Princess Sarah!" he bellowed in alarm. "Are you injured?"
"No, but I've got to go back to school. You have to wait here until I get back."
"As you command." Sarah stuck her hand out with her pinky extended.
"Pinky promise,"
she said. The bear looked down at his own conspicuously fingerless paw. "But I don't have a pinky," he cried in dismay.
"Just a regular promise, then."
"I solemnly swear," he bellowed.
"Good,"
said Sarah, shrugging on her backpack. I walked to the front door and let her out, then walked down with her to the curb to wait for the bus. Soon, the little yellow school bus that ran the circuit to and from Sarah's kindergarten was pulling to a stop with the whine of old brakes. I tried landing a kiss on Sarah's head, but missed and hit her backpack as she bolted to the bus and through the open doors. I sighed wistfully as I watched her jog down the middle aisle and sit with her waiting friends. They really do grow up so fast. I returned to the house to find Frank and Teddy had resumed last night's coloring, his massive paw clumsily curled around a crayon as he drew spiked spears and axes in the hands of Snow White and the 7 dwarves. I thought about saying something to him, decided it was a waste of time, and dug the phone out of my pocket, hitting the old redial button on the number that had placed me on hold all yesterday afternoon. The line rang once, and a familiar voice answered.
"Hell customer service. How may I hell you today?"
"This is Darren Rogers again."
"Oh, Mr. Rogers. How are Sarah and Frank and Teddy getting along?"
"They're getting along fine, but that's not really the point. I'm afraid I have to insist on returning him. He doesn't even belong on this planet, much less in my living room." I turned to see Frank and Teddy standing behind me. My stomach dropped as he glared at me. I stammered, grasping for an explanation. I didn't mean you. I was talking about the pet hamster." "If the hamster is a threat to Sarah's safety, then I shall terminate it." "Please, don't do that." "That is preferable. I find the hamster to be cute. I do not wish to destroy it." I could feel my mouth hanging wide open again. Okay.
"Mr. Rogers."
The receptionist's stern voice came through the headset. "Yes," I replied.
"If you really insist there's a problem with the teddy bear, I might be able to help you."
"Really? How's that?" I asked, daring to hope.
"Satan had a last-minute cancellation. I can squeeze you in for an appointment today instead."
"Oh," I said, breathing out with an odd mixture of relief and dread. "That would be great. When's the appointment?"
"Now,"
she replied.
"I'll go ahead and buzz you 3 down."
"Down? What do you mean, down?" I didn't get an answer, though. Instead, a column of black and purple flames erupted around me. My living room dissolved into darkness, and I felt an intense pressure all around me, like I was being sucked through a straw. A hot, sulfur-scented air rushed past me as I fell into the darkness, until finally, I landed on with a thud of something soft. Looking down, I saw that it was a cushy office chair. As I looked to the left and right, I saw empty office chairs on either side of me. A moment later, Sarah and Frank and Teddy had fallen into them from above. Judging by our surroundings, we were in some sort of cave. The walls were carved of rough brown stone that radiated shimmering heat. The ceiling was shrouded in darkness but for long stalactites that jutted down like stone crooked teeth. In the far back corner of the cave, sat an enormous blue-scaled dragon head. Sarah was standing around with the same look of wonder on her face she'd had when I'd first taken her to Disneyland. At the opposite end of the room, there was a large black desk of polished obsidian, behind which sat a high-backed leather office chair. I didn't have to wonder where Satan was for very long, because a puff of black and purple flames materialized behind the desk, and when the flames and smoke had vanished, he was sitting in his chair, smiling at us all as if we were having Sunday tea. Satan's skin was bright red, and he wore a silk black suit with dull gray pinstripes. He had 2 small polished black horns and a neatly trimmed goatee. "So," he said, "welcome to hell." He beamed around at all of us, but the room remained silent. I don't get many visitors down here, besides the inmates, I mean." I saw out of the corner of my eye that Sarah had crawled into the dragon head's mouth with Frank and Teddy, and they had begun having a tea party. I wondered where they had gotten the teacups. "Sarah, I don't think that you should." "Don't worry, Darren," Satan cut me off. "The dragon is mostly dead." "Mostly?" Satan ignored my question. "As I understand it," he said, threading his fingers together and setting his hands on the desk, "you have some problem with Frank and Teddy?" I heard the jingling of china as Frank and Teddy set his teacup down. "You told me the problem was with the hamster, Darren." I am sorry for my outburst," Frank and Teddy bellowed. "I have not eaten today. You have run out of Cheetos." "You had 30 bags," I protested rather weakly. I looked to Satan for confirmation that this was an absurd amount, but he was buzzing the intercom button on his office phone. "Tina?" he said.
"Yes, Mr. Satan,"
replied the same voice from the customer helpline. "And can you get Frank and Teddy 200 pounds of Cheetos?" 300 pounds, Frank and Teddy interjected. 300 pounds of Cheetos? Corrected Satan.
"Right away, Mr. Satan."
"Thank you. I require the proper amount of fuel to sustain my full satanic power." Immediately, the door to the office burst open, and a giant blue-skinned demon with bulging muscles and a hatchet sticking out of his head pushed in a giant wheelbarrow full of Cheetos. "We make them down here," Satan said, grinning. "Now, Mr. Rogers, what issue is it that you have with Frank and Teddy?" "Well, just look at him. He's a monster." The room collectively gasped. "We try not to use that word down here, Darren." He turned to the blue-skinned demon. "I apologize for that, Jerry. He's from Earth." The blue-skinned demon shot me a nasty look, while I once again tried and failed to make noises with my mouth. He huffed through his giant bowl-like nostrils before stalking out of the room. Satan turned back to me and put on a patronizing smile. "I'm surprised at you for judging Frank and Teddy by his appearance," he said. "You know, my own daughter is cute as a button, but she's the one who put the hatchet in Jerry's head." "You have a daughter?" I asked. "I have 700. Well, Sarah is my only daughter, and I can't help but worry about her when there's a giant, undead teddy bear thing hanging around." I heard giggling and turned to see that Sarah climbed on the back of Frank and Teddy's head, and he was pretending to not know where she was. "I have been taken in by your deception. I am not aware that you are on the back of my head." Satan leaned over on his desk, resting his chin on interlocked fingers, and put on an unconvincing expression of empathy. I think I know what you mean. I know just what to do. You do? Oh, thank God. I mean Satan. Satan waved his hand dismissively and pushed a button on the intercom. Tina? He said.
Yes, Mr. Satan,
The intercom replied. Can you please send in Miss Hatchetface?
Yes, Mr. Satan.
Miss Hatchetface? I said, unsure. You mean that giant blue demon was a woman? You mean Jerry? Said Satan. No, Miss Hatchetface is my personal nanny. I'm going to send her back up to Earth with you to look after your daughter and Frank and Teddy. But no need to thank me, Satan said, grinning in modest appreciation of his own generosity. It's all part of what I do. You're gonna love Miss Hatchetface. She did a great job with my kids. Well, not the first few hundred, but she got the hang of it eventually. Satan, There were 3 knocks at the door. The knock that interrupted me nearly knocked the door off of its hinges. That'll be Miss Hatchetface now, Satan grinned, rubbing his hands together. You guys are gonna get along great, Darren. I'm sure of it. I didn't know what to say, and so I simply slumped my shoulders and mumbled out a subdued, "Okay." Satan sprang up and opened the door, and Miss Hatchetface came in. I gasped when I saw her. For the first time since Sarah had written to Satan, my sudden surprise was pleasant. And Miss Hatchetface was the most beautiful creature I'd ever laid eyes on. She was petite and pink-skinned, with a small button nose and glittering obsidian eyes. Her black hair shone like silk, lightly brushing the tops of her shoulders as she turned her head toward me. "Are you Mr. Rogers?" she asked. Satan leaned over and whispered, "She's half succubus," in my ear as I shook her soft, delicate hand. I said. Miss Hatchetface's slender pink tail twitched as she giggled. "I've never met a human before. Are they all as handsome as you?" My mouth went dry, and I suddenly became aware of how very large and awkward my tongue was. "So," Satan clapped his hands together cheerily. "Are we all set here, then?" I stared into Miss Hatchetface's dark black eyes, and before I knew what was happening, my head was nodding up and down of its own accord. "Great," Satan said. "Now come on. I'll give you all a tour of the offices before I send you back up." "Offices? You mean you run a company down here?" "Oh, sure. Hell Corp is one of the largest multidimensional corporations in existence. Come on. I'll show you to Daryl's department. We've got a new project out of there. Top secret, you know." "Well, if it's top secret, why are you showing me?" "Because I trust you, Darren," he replied. "Also, Hell's implicit, non-disclosure agreement states that if you attempt to reveal company secrets to anyone, your head will explode in spectacular fashion." My heart sank down to my stomach. "Maybe I can do without this project," I said. Satan waved his hand dismissively. "Nonsense. It's really interesting. You'll love it." He buzzed the intercom again. "Tina?" "Yes, Mr. Satan." "Can you send in Jerry to show Darren and Miss Hatchetface to Daryl's apartment?" "Yes, Mr. Satan." The hulking blue-skinned demon stomped into the room again. "Come, tiny human," he said in a thick voice that brooked no argument. Hold on a second, Satan. You said Miss Hatchetface and me. What about Sarah and Frank and Teddy?" "Come on, Darren. Do you really want to expose your daughter to the horrors of Hell Corp? She'll be much happier in here with me and Frank and Teddy." On the one hand, I had to admit that he was probably right. Sarah was probably safer in his office. but he had a sly look in his eyes that I didn't quite trust. It felt like he wanted to get rid of me for some reason. I'm not really sure. Just relax, came a soft voice in my ear. I turned to see Miss Hatchetface smiling placidly. She set her hand gently on my shoulder, and I felt a shivering warmth spread from her touch throughout the rest of my body. My head began to swim in a pleasant fog. Okay, let's go. Miss Hatchetface took me by the arm and led me down a dim, torchlit corridor, following Jerry as he stomped along ahead of us. The rough stone walls of the hallway were so hot that little droplets of molten stone were rolling down the sides, smoking and sizzling as they landed on the earthen floor. At the end of the corridor was a colossal stone doorway with a heavy brass ring for a knob. "This is Daryl's department," said Jerry. Huffing out his bowl-like nostrils, he put his shoulder to the door and slowly wedged it open. With a horrible sound of stone grinding on stone, the room inside looked like any other office building. Rows of cubicles were tightly crowded together under flickering fluorescent lights, and demons of all manner of strange appearances sat typing at box-monitored computers that looked at least 20 years old. There were huge reptilian demons with rocky gray scales and thick, sinewy tails that thudded against the linoleum floor as they typed, and colossal bear demons that shuffled around in suits, glaring at their subordinates, and small, bat-like demons with simian faces and vampiric teeth that whizzed above our heads, delivering files from one desk to another. A short and fat reptilian demon with a balding head and gold-rimmed spectacles bustled up to us. "Just what in the hell do you think you're doing, Jerry?" he said. "Satan wants to give this meat sack a tour of the office," said Jerry. Daryl peered over his sunglasses at me and squinted his eyes before turning back to Jerry. "A tour of an office? Send the poor man to a factory. It'll be just as boring, and he won't interrupt our work." "Nothing I can do. Satan's orders. I'll be outside." Jerry gave me a withering look before turning around and lumbering out of the office. The stone door slid shut behind him and closed with a resounding thud. Daryl stared at the two of us for a moment, threw his hands up in resignation, and said, "All right then, come with me." He turned around and beckoned for us to follow him down a row of cubicles. "This is where we handle the bulk of Hellcorp's business. It's not terribly exciting, I'm afraid. Mostly just paperwork regarding interdimensional soul commerce." "I'm sorry, did you say soul commerce?" "Oh, sure. We get a steady supply from Earth for free, so selling them to other dimensions is pure profit." I ducked out of the way as a leathery black file demon whizzed by my head. "So, who buys the souls?" I asked. "Various cosmic entities," he replied, taking a moment to smack a sleeping employee on the back of the head with his clipboard. "Well, what do you do with them?" I asked. Daryl shrugged. "Not my department. Yeah, I'm afraid it's not too glamorous, but it does have its perks. We've got an excellent medical plan, for instance." "Really?" "Oh, sure. We can stop by the company doctor if you want. Just tell them if any of your organs are bothering you, and they'll remove them free of charge. Though I'm afraid anesthesia is extra." No thanks. I need all of my organs to live." "Really?" Daryl said. "I'd stay away from the office shredder then. It's terribly aggressive." Thanks for the tip." We arrived at the end of the long row of cubicles to find a normal-looking white office door. There was a brown plastic plaque on the side that read, "Top Secret Project." "All right," said Daryl, hand on the knob. "Are you ready to have your mind blown?" "No, not really." "That's the spirit," he said, pushing the door open. When I saw what was inside, my mind was more muddled than blown. There was a crowd of about 20 normal people in business suits, casually milling around and not doing much of anything. Daryl let out a long, contented sigh. They're magnificent, aren't they? He said. That depends. What are they? Daryl turned to me, and for the first time since I'd met him, he was smiling, with a mischievous gleam in his eye. What do you think they are? He asked. I don't know. They just look like regular people to me. Ha! Shouted Daryl, smacking his knee with his clipboard. Exactly. They look like regular people. Well, what are they then? Daryl waved the two of us inside and walked us around the room. Once I got a closer look at the people milling around, I noticed there was something slightly off about a lot of them. Their eyes were just a bit too wide, and they all wore broad smiles for no perceivable reason. One of my more brilliant ideas, said Daryl. As you probably know, we own about 99% of all souls in Washington, D.C. You do? I said. Of course. And politicians' souls go for 3 times the price as regular ones. Oh, I think I get it. You're going to take these people and turn them into politicians. You're almost right, said Daryl. You see, what we do is wait for the ones whose souls we own rise to power, and then, bam, we swap them out with an exact copy. And since we already have claim to the politicians' souls anyway, we just bring them down to hell a little early. But don't people who know them notice something's off? I asked. Daryl chuckled and shook his head. Maybe they would if we were replacing regular people, but these are politicians. Nobody can tell the difference. He looked down at his watch, an ostentatious gold Rolex with a tight leather band that dug into the fat of his wrist. Well, that should do it. Why don't I take you back to the hallway and Jerry can get you back to Satan's office? I was starting to get a headache from the harsh fluorescent lights, and so I readily agreed. Daryl led us out of the top secret project room and back down the row of cubicles. He rapped on the big stone door of the office and yelled, Jerry, I'm done with this lot. You can take them back to Satan now. I heard Jerry grunt in affirmation, and the door slowly slid back open. We followed him back down the torchlit corridor to Satan's office. He pushed the door open, and we strolled in to see Sarah and Satan hunched over the huge obsidian desk, discussing something in low tones while Frank and Teddy crammed his face with Cheetos in the corner. When Satan saw us enter, he hastily leaned back in his chair and straightened his tie. Ah, back a little early, aren't you, Darren? How about that secret project? Pretty cool, huh? Yeah, I guess. What were you two just talking about? Sarah was just asking me some questions about hell. A healthy curiosity on this one. She'll grow up to be a scientist. And anyway, I've got some more important business matters to attend to, so I'll go ahead and send you 4 back up to Earth. Before I could object, Satan had pressed a little purple button on his desk, and the 4 of us were shooting through a tube of purple flames back to my living room. Chapter 4. One more satanic gift. I arrived back home in a rush of acrid smoke, hitting the living room floor hard on all 4s. Miss Hatchetface gracefully alighted next to me, and Frank and Teddy and Sarah landed across the room in the armchair, with Sarah on Frank and Teddy's lap. I turned towards Sarah. You know, if you don't tell me what you and Satan were talking about, I'm gonna have to ground you, I said. I can't, Daddy. It's top secret. I sighed, scooped myself up, and shuffled over to the couch, collapsing in a boneless puddle of exhaustion. It was only a brief moment of respite, however, before there was a loud pounding at the front door. Miss Hatchetface opened the door with a bubbly, "Hi," but nobody was on the stoop. She bent over and picked 2 envelopes up off the porch. She folded one up and slid it into her pocket before she turned around and carried the other one to me. "Mr. Rogers," she said, "you've gotten another letter from Satan." She handed me the envelope. "Thanks," I said. I hesitated as I stared down at the envelope in my hands. It was just one letter then? Nothing else?
"Nope, only one letter."
I wondered why she was lying to me, but the thought was soon driven from my mind by the contents of my own envelope.
"Dear Dan, your name is Dan, right? I'm afraid I'm really not good with names. I'm just going to assume that it's Dan, and if it's not, you can correct me the next time you're in hell. Anyway, the reason I'm writing isn't to ask your name, but to let you know that I went ahead and took care of your little Frankenteddy problem. The solution is scheduled to be delivered shortly after this letter. Yours truly, Satan."
A heavy dread pervaded my body. After all, my current experience with Satan's solutions to problems had not left me optimistic in regards to what he considered reasonable. My mood only worsened when I saw a large moving van pull to a stop in front of my house. I was still feeling a little woozy from breathing the sulfur and ash-laced air of hell, and so I asked Miss Hatchetface to check in on it for me. She went outside to the truck and came back hauling a giant wooden crate that must have been 10 times her size, dropping it unceremoniously outside of the front door.
"How do we get it in?"
she asked me. I slowly shook my head. "Try the garage?" I suggested.
"Oh, that's a good idea,"
she said, hauling the crate up as if it were full of feathers and carrying it towards the garage. A few moments later, I heard the sound of grinding metal coming from the garage, and I quickly found my feet and rushed outside. I saw Miss Hatchetface shoving the garage door up with her bare hands, folding the metal up like it was paper. She threw it into the open position and stood grinning with her arms crossed, admiring her handiwork.
"Wow, that door was pretty heavy. Humans must be stronger than you look."
"There's a garage door opener," I replied.
"A what?"
"Never mind."
"Okay, we'd better get this crate inside and crack it open."
My urge to be a gentleman and help her lift the crate was not quite as powerful as my urge to avoid a hernia, so I opted to let her move it inside herself. When we had gotten it inside, she grabbed a hold of one of the wooden sides and wrenched it off with such force that it flew across the garage and smashed through the driver's side window of my car.
"Oops, sometimes I don't know my own strength. Hercules is a distant relative."
"It's fine," I replied, though it clearly wasn't. Before I was able to get too upset about the car window, however, my breath was taken away by the contents of the crate. "Is that what I think it is?"
"Oh, it sure is. Wow, Satan must really like you. These are rare."
Inside the box was a tangled mess of black branches and dark purple leaves. The leaves twisted around in little conical spirals, and at the center of each spiral rested a large, orange, pinecone-shaped fruit. Upon closer inspection, I could see that each individual fruit was a conglomerate of dozens of Cheetos. I reached out and snapped off one of the Cheeto fruit, and a new one instantly sprouted in its place. "So, it's a Cheeto tree?"
"Yes."
"Well, all right then." I turned around to head back inside when I saw Sarah and Frankenteddy ambling down the sidewalk, hand in paw. "Hey!" I shouted after them. They either didn't hear or didn't care, however, as they kept right on walking. The last thing I wanted to do was explain to the Homeowners Association why I was keeping demons in my house, and so I sprinted after them, determined to get them back inside before the neighbors saw. By the time I managed to get in front of them, I was out of breath and panting. I leaned over with my hands on my knees as I tried to explain why it wasn't a good idea for Frankenteddy to be wandering around the neighborhood. "Where? Giant teddy bear neighbors," was all I managed to gasp out.
"I think he means you should go back inside so that the neighbors don't see you,"
I heard Miss Hatchetface say from behind me. I nodded my head in vigorous agreement. I cannot abandon my charge to the wild dangers of the suburban neighborhood, Frankenteddy boomed. I shall accompany her on her quest, no matter the danger. And together, we shall go to the park and catch butterflies. Sarah looked up at Frankenteddy and laughed.
They're called butterflies, she said.
Butterflies? Frankenteddy roared. That does not make sense. Are they flies made of butter? Sarah giggled and didn't respond.
I think I have a solution,
said Miss Hatchetface.
Let's head back to the house and I'll make up a disguise for you. Then you two can go to the park together.
That is acceptable, but it must be fearsome.
Of course,
said Miss Hatchetface. She turned to me.
Mr. Rogers, are you okay?
I was still too out of breath to answer, so I simply gave her a thumbs up in response. A little wrinkle appeared in the middle of her brow.
Are you sure you're okay? Maybe it's better if I carry you back.
Without waiting for a response, she put one arm around my neck and swept my knees out from under me with the other. My head bumped gently against her shoulder as she carried me back to the house. She smelled faintly of cinnamon and sandalwood. When we got back inside, Sarah and Frankenteddy ran to play upstairs and Miss Hatchetface set me down on the sofa.
You just rest for a while,
she said, smiling down at me.
I think I saw something upstairs that would make a good disguise for Frankenteddy.
Yeah, okay. I'll be here, regretting my life decisions. I watched as Miss Hatchetface climbed the staircase. She paused at the top, and I quickly pretended to look elsewhere as she turned to look at me. She laughed and continued on upstairs. Smooth, Darren. I reached for the remote and turned on the television. There was an infomercial on about some sort of bacon coat rack-looking contraption that you could stick in the microwave. The over-enthusiastic spokesman was yelling into the camera about how it could revolutionize your entire morning breakfast routine. I closed my eyes and tuned it out, and before long, the exhaustion of the day and the monotonous drone of infomercials took its toll, and I found myself drifting off to sleep. It wasn't long, however, before I was awakened by Sarah, who had seized my arm and was shaking it violently.
Daddy, look!
She squealed. I looked. Frankenteddy had been draped in a giant mess of fabric that did in fact seem to disguise the fact that he was a giant demon teddy bear. The costume, however, was anything but fearsome. It was bright pink and covered in a unicorn pattern, with lace at the bottom that brushed the floor whenever he moved. I turned to Miss Hatchetface. Are those Sarah's curtains?
Yeah, cool, right?
Sarah shouted. Is it fearsome? Frankenteddy boomed. Yeah, sure, I replied. I looked at Miss Hatchetface. But why did you have to use the curtains? I asked. Miss Hatchetface shrugged.
They were the only thing that was big enough.
Okay. May we go to the park now and exterminate the flies of butter? Frankenteddy bellowed.
We're not going to exterminate them, we're going to catch them, said Sarah.
I make no promises. I pushed myself into a sitting position. Yeah, you can go to the park and catch butterflies, but I'm coming along as well.
Yay!
Sarah exclaimed. I am also excited, added Frankenteddy. Miss Hatchetface? I asked.
Sure. Let me just grab some Cheeto fruit for Frankenteddy.
Frankenteddy's mouth fell open into a perfect O, and his eyes widened to the size of dinner plates. You have Cheeto fruit?
Oh yes, Satan set over a tree,
Miss Hatchetface replied. I am exceedingly pleased by this information. Let us feast on the delicious fruit of Cheeto until our satanic appetites are sated. Reluctantly, I rolled my tired body off the couch, and we all headed out to the garage. Frank and Teddy found a box of trash bags and filled 2 of them up with Cheeto fruit, and was visibly disappointed when he realized that they would not fit with us in the car. I tried and failed to avoid nicking my hand as I brushed the broken glass out of the driver's seat. We all got in, and I pulled out into the road and began driving to the park. About 1 minute into the drive, Frank and Teddy startled me by yelling my name from the back seat. Lord Rogers. Lord, you can just call me Mr. Rogers, Frank and Teddy. That is a negative. Sarah has informed me that she is a princess. Therefore, you must be a lord. Okay, Frank and Teddy, what is it? I wish to commend you on your mastery of this fearsome metal beast. You ride with the skill of a battle-hardened torque spearer in Satan's cavalry. Fearsome metal beast? You mean the car? Frank and Teddy turned to Sarah. Do I mean the car? Yeah, you mean the car. He turned back to me. Yes, I mean the car. Right, I got that. Thank you, Frank and Teddy. You are very welcome. I watched Frank and Teddy in the mirror as he stared out of my broken window. And suddenly, he turned to his own window and smashed a humongous furry paw right through it. The tires squealed as I slammed on the brakes. I slammed against my seatbelt as the car jerked to a stop. What on earth are you doing? I wish to feel the breeze. So, I opened the window. There's a button for that, you know. What? I sighed and rubbed my temples. Never mind. Very well, Lord Rogers. I sighed and put the car back in drive, and 5 minutes later, we were pulling up the road to the park. Little did I know that disaster was about to strike. Chapter 5. Kerfuffle in the Park. A crisp autumn breeze blew the newly turning leaves around the grounds of the park. Frank and Teddy and Sarah dashed around the sprawling green lawn of waving neon pink butterfly nets, as Miss Hatchetface and I sat on a bench and watched. After a few minutes of watching the 2 of them miserably fail at catching butterflies, Miss Hatchetface turned to me and smiled. So, Mr. Rogers, is there a Mrs. Rogers in your life at all? My tongue began to feel cumbersome and clumsy, as it always did when Miss Hatchetface looked at me the way she was looking at me now. Or any way at all, really. No, not anymore, I managed to choke out. Really? Miss Hatchetface cocked her head to the side. What happened? She, ran off shortly after Sarah was born. Oh my, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to bring up a bad memory. Miss Hatchetface frowned. No, it's okay. You didn't know. Let's change the subject, she said, trying to sound cheery. What do you do for a living? I'm a writer. Oh, really? That's neat. I've always wanted to write a book, but I never got around to it. Yeah, I always wanted to write a good book, and I'm still trying to get around to it. Miss Hatchetface laughed. What about you? I heard you were Satan's nanny. That must have been an interesting job. It was certainly a handful, laughed Miss Hatchetface. Satan's daughters all tend to take after their father, so they can be quite the mischievous little bunch. I remember one time I took little Sophie to see the dinosaurs on Earth. She accidentally stepped in a pile of dinosaur doo-doo in her brand new princess shoes, and she was so upset that she grabbed a comet from space and smashed it right into the nearest dinosaur. Of course, she overdid it a bit.
And, well, that was the end of the big lizards. Miss Hatchetface covered her mouth and giggled. The poor thing was grounded for a month after that.
Wow, that's, cute.
Isn't it?
Laughed Miss Hatchetface, giving me a playful punch on the shoulder that nearly knocked me off the bench. Knowing from my rather inextensive experience with women that hitting was supposed to be a good sign, I desperately racked my brain for another topic of conversation to keep the happy mood going. But before I could come up with one, we were interrupted by a scream coming from the direction where Frank and Teddy and Sarah were playing. We both jumped to our feet and rushed towards Sarah to see her sitting on the ground and sobbing while Josh, a notorious neighborhood tormentor of insects and small children, was pulling the wings off of her butterflies and laughing. Before I could even open my mouth to admonish Josh, a huge pink blur whizzed by me, and Frank and Teddy had scooped the boy off the ground by the back of his shirt and began roaring at him in his deafening baritone. "You are not permitted to harm the Princess Sarah's flies of butter," he yelled, so loudly that Josh covered his ear with his hands. "You will apologize to the Princess Sarah, and then I shall send you to hell forthwith, so that you may be judged for your transgressions."
"Please, God, no!"
Josh shouted. "God will not save you from the Dark Lord Satan." Sarah reached up and gently tugged on Frank and Teddy's paw and said,
"It's okay, Frank and Teddy. He's not worth our time. Just let him go."
Frank and Teddy dropped Josh into a sobbing heap, and the boy wasted no time in sprinting out of the park as fast as his legs could carry him, while Frank and Teddy shouted after him, "Be warned, tiny human. The judgment in hell will not be so lenient." Sarah stared down at the dead butterflies, tears moistening the edges of her eyes, and Miss Hatchetface covered her mouth and shook her head. Frank and Teddy laid an enormous paw on Sarah's shoulder. "There is no greater honor than to die in battle," he said, as gently as his giant voice would allow.
"Yeah, I guess so,"
Sarah replied, sounding unconvinced. "I believe that I have detected insincerity in your voice. Allow me to rectify the situation," said Frank and Teddy. He bent down and picked the dead butterflies up in his enormous paws. As he held them in his upturned palms, a cloud of dark smoke began to swirl around them, and then, miraculously, they began to fly again.
"Wow, Frank and Teddy, you brought them back to life."
"I have merely endowed them with the power of Satan," he replied. As I watched Sarah and Frank and Teddy playing with the newly revived butterflies, I realized that maybe I'd been wrong to judge him based on the way he looked. I realized that maybe he wasn't so bad after all. And, again, I realized that maybe, and just maybe, he could be exactly what Sarah needed after her mom had disappeared. And then the butterflies started breathing fire. Chapter 6. The Remote of Minor Inconveniences. The fire-breathing butterflies followed us home, fluttering around the car, and occasionally breathing out jets of blue and red flames that melted the roadside mailboxes. When we arrived at the house, I tried to shut them up in a jar, but I quickly discovered that jam jars are no match for hellfire. They had already managed to burn through 4 of my curtains, 1 couch cushion, and all of our ice cream. Though I suspect that was actually Frank and Teddy, by the time we finally got them under control. But just as I had finished putting out the literal fires, a metaphorical one sprang up in their place in the form of a souvenir from hell. With great pomp and ceremony, Frank and Teddy announced he had a gift for Sarah. In fact, he had it the entire time, but he had simply forgotten to give it to her until now. Looking back, I've often wondered if Satan ordered Frankenteddy to gift the souvenir to Sarah in order to distract me from what he was secretly planning down in hell. In the end, I suppose it doesn't really matter. Before I could stop him, Frankenteddy produced an ordinary-looking TV remote from seemingly out of nowhere and presented it to Sarah with a huge grin on his face.
"Hooray, a present!"
squealed Sarah. She looked it over with puzzlement on her face, and then she asked,
"What does it do?" I don't think that's an appropriate gift for a child, Frankenteddy,"
said Miss Hatchetface. "Nonsense. It is a child-friendly one," replied Frankenteddy. "A child-friendly what?" I asked. Miss Hatchetface plucked the remote out of Frankenteddy's paw and examined it. Then, she began softly laughing to herself.
"Oh, I see. In hell, the demons watch the punishments of the damned on a sort of reality TV,"
she explained, turning toward me.
"And they can select the punishment they want to see with their TV remote controls."
"Really? That's horrible."
"But this one is for child demons. Take a look."
She handed me the remote, and I held it to my face as I examined it. The remote was made of ordinary black plastic, and at first glance, looked like any other TV remote control. Printed across the top in silver letters were the words, "The TV remote of minor inconveniences." Instead of numbers and menu buttons, it was covered in buttons of irregular shapes and sizes that said things like tickle, tinnitus, and unscratchable itch. At the center of the remote were two big purple plus and minus buttons that simply read, "Volume." I realized too late that Sarah was standing on her tiptoes behind me and reaching for the remote. She snatched it out of my hand and mashed the tickle button while she pointed it at Frankenteddy, who immediately erupted into thunderous gales of laughter. "I find no humor in this situation, but I am unable to prevent myself from laughing." I was about to take the remote away when Miss Hatchetface caught my eye and smiled, and I momentarily forgot what I was doing.
"Why don't we leave them to it, Mr. Rogers?"
she said.
"I had a private matter I wanted to discuss with you."
Private matter?" I stammered. Those deep black eyes drew me in.
"Yeah, maybe we could go somewhere more discreet."
Yeah, discreet. Great idea." She smiled as she reached out and grabbed my hand, leading me slowly across the room and up the stairs. She walked me into the master bedroom and sat me down on the bed, closing and locking the door behind her, before turning towards me. One corner of her mouth was raised into a smirk as she looked at me and said,
"So, about that private matter."
Chapter 7. A Lizard from the Past. The next morning, as I lay near comatose in bed, Miss Hatchetface brought me a tray of what I call a demon's best attempt at a human breakfast. She set the tray down on my lap as I fidgeted in my torn and burned pajamas. I tried to suppress the look of deep discomfort that came reflexively to my face as I eyed the questionable spread. There was a large, green glass bowl filled with a mess of shiny black tentacles, twisting and fidgeting about in pink slime, a small dessert plate that seemed to consist of nothing but purple flames, and a wine glass of what I surmised by the smell to be pure gasoline. "Wow, this looks... wow," I said. I tried my very best to put on a smile, but it didn't seem to quite fit my face.
"Great, right? I once competed in Hell's Iron Chef contest."
She straightened her shoulders proudly. "Really? I had no idea Hell had an Iron Chef contest."
"Oh yeah, I didn't win, but the medical examiner who performed the autopsies said that it couldn't be conclusively proven that it was my food that had killed the judges." Anyways, eat up. You'll need to gain some strength back after last night.
I cleared my throat nervously. I'm not hungry, I lied.
Are you sure? Because I had some grave and unexpected news for you, and I was hoping to at least get your blood sugar up before I told you.
You, what now? I asked, nervously scratching my thigh through one of the burn holes in my pajama pants.
I wanted to talk about Sarah,
she said. She sat down in the bed next to me and placed a warm hand on my leg. What about her? I asked.
Don't you think it's a little odd that Satan answered her letter with a 7-foot-tall demon teddy bear?
Well, now that you mention it.
What I mean to say is...
She paused, and then leaned in a bit closer to me. I caught the scent of burning firewood with an undertone of something musky and sweet rising from her skin.
Do you have any demonic blood in your family?
Actually, my grandfather was a demon, I said.
Oh, really?
No. She laughed.
You're funny, Mr. Rogers,
she said. But then her voice lowered to a conspiratorial tone as she leaned even closer.
Do you think that Satan answers mail from every little girl that sends letters to him?
How many little girls send letters to Satan?
Well, they have to send them to somebody, don't they? I mean, Santa never answers them, that fat old drunk.
Are you saying that Santa Claus is actually...
Look, most girls would be terrified to death of a thing like Frank and Teddy, but Sarah seems to have an affinity for him. She seems to have no problem controlling him whatsoever. Can you do that?
Well, no,
but I thought that was because of how Satan designed him.
Miss Hatchetface laughed again, and this time, I was sure her tail must have left a mark as it slapped painfully into my shins.
Satan doesn't design anything. He just wings it and hopes for the best. And besides, Frank and Teddy has the soul of a demon. No ordinary mortal would be able to tame him. Satan must have known that. Otherwise, he never would have sent such a dangerous present in the first place.
I wasn't sure if I trusted Miss Hatchetface's assessment. After all, my few experiences with Satan's judgment had resulted in fire-breathing butterflies, a TV remote that gave you tinnitus, and a giant teddy bear who had nearly sent a neighborhood boy to hell. Then again, it had also resulted in Miss Hatchetface, and I had no problem with that. So, what does that mean? I asked her, hoping that the answer would be, nothing at all. Your daughter is still your sweet little angel, and nothing at all has to change. But, of course, that wasn't the answer she gave.
Well, it just means that instead of learning the piano or saxophone after school, you should consider getting Sarah a tutor in satanic magic.
Oh, is that all? I asked. I suddenly grew very dizzy and absent-mindedly took a sip of the gasoline-scented drink that Miss Hatchetface had brought me that morning. Oh, this tastes like vanilla, I said in surprise.
Yes, it does.
After a moment, I felt a strange sensation at the sides of my head. Miss Hatchetface?
Yes, Mr. Rogers.
Are my ears smoking?
Yes, Mr. Rogers.
Okay. It took about an hour for the smoke in my ears to thin out to light gray wisps, and by that time, Miss Hatchetface had managed to convince me that getting Sarah an after-school tutor in satanic magic was the right thing for our family. Though, given her exceptional powers of persuasion, I suspect she could have just as easily convinced me to eat my shoes. That fateful decision made, we went down to the living room to make the announcement, my stomach empty and grumbling as I watched Sarah lightly torment Frank and Teddy with the TV remote of minor inconveniences. Each time she would press a button, a differently colored flash of brilliant light would shoot from the remote and collide with Frank and Teddy. The first flash gave him a pig's tail, The second one blew his ears up to the size of hubcaps, and the last one summoned a little blue sparrow that sat on his head and pecked him every few seconds. Frank and Teddy didn't seem to mind the ears. He didn't seem to even notice the sparrow, but the pig's tail seemed to utterly confound him. "I do not understand the purpose of this small twirly appendage," he said, craning his neck around to have a better look at it.
"It's funny,"
Sarah squealed. "I see. The purpose is humor. I am suitably amused." Sarah threw her head back against the couch cushions and kicked her feet up and down as she exploded into wild giggling. I cleared my throat in a rather non-effectual attempt to get their attention. I turned hopelessly to Miss Hatchetface, who stuck 2 fingers in her mouth, and wolf whistled so loudly that 2 of the picture frames on the mantelpiece shattered to pieces, along with my eardrums. I said again, noting that my voice seemed notably quieter against my now ringing ears. "Sarah, Miss Hatchetface and I have had a discussion, and we've decided that from now on, you're going to be receiving after-school lessons from a tutor in satanic magic." My hope that Sarah would balk at the prospect of receiving any kinds of lessons after school was immediately quashed by her enthusiastic hooray, and I resigned myself to the fact that I was going to be inviting yet another demon into a household, which had already begun to feel too crowded with them. "So," I said, turning back to Miss Hatchetface, "now that that's settled, I guess we should write to Satan and have him send somebody up." Miss Hatchetface opened her mouth to answer, but she was interrupted by 3 curt knocks at the front door. She grinned sheepishly, saying,
"That should be her now."
Before I could ask just how in the hell Satan had already managed to find out that I had agreed, the door was swinging open, and my heart was sinking all the way down to my stomach, then my feet, and forever downward into a bottomless pit of despair, as I saw what was standing in my doorway. The creature's stooped, crooked shoulders were draped in an ugly, vomit-green sweater that had an unintentionally abstract likeness of a cat on the front. Little fuzzy white yarn baubles hung off the ends of the sleeves. A reptilian tail poked out of the bottom of a thick, canvas-colored skirt, slapping on my porch in a telltale steady rhythm of impatience. But the most horrible aspect of the creature by far was its face. It was the face of an old woman, lined so many times over by the unforgiving years that it looked like a crumpled piece of tissue crinkled around a spiderweb of veins. The creature's milky, reptilian eyes were distorted behind the thick fishbowl lenses of its bifocals. But the face wasn't the monster's most horrible aspect, because it was ugly. No, that I could have handled. The face was the worst because it was the face of my 6th grade English teacher, Miss Robbins. "Hello, Darren," Miss Robbins croaked out, in her trademark tone of perpetual disappointment. I gasped out. What the hell are you doing here?" Miss Robbins clucked her tongue the way she did when she was about to tell you just how much of a disappointment you were, and why. "I do not allow foul language in my classroom, Darren, no matter how old you are." "You're from hell. How could that possibly offend you?" "Would it offend you if I used your home country as an expletive, Darren?" she retorted. As Miss Robbins looked over from her bifocals at me, fixing me with her milked-over reptilian eyes, I suddenly felt like I was in the 6th grade again, and I had forgotten to do my homework. I opened my mouth, and closed it again, and turned to Miss Hatchetface. "I'm not having this hateful old biddy teaching my kid," I said, but before Miss Hatchetface could respond, I heard another smattering of giggles and turned to see Sarah standing on the end of Miss Robin's tail as it smacked up and down, bouncing her in the air a few inches each time. Miss Robbins was smiling down at her so kindly that she almost didn't even look ugly anymore.
"Oh, yes, dearie, it's quite fun, isn't it?"
That reminded me why I hated Miss Robbins so much as a kid. It wasn't just because she was pure evil incarnated in the form of a leathery old lady, but because of how unfair she had been. In Miss Robinson's class, the boys were all treated like hooligans, and the girls were all treated like princesses. Sarah turned to me, errant strands of hair falling over her face and sticking to her lips. She promptly puffed them away.
"Can she stay, Daddy?"
she asked, putting on the same look she did when she wanted an extra scoop of ice cream or an extra hour of TV before bedtime. It was a look that she knew cut right through to my heart and put me completely at her mercy.
"Can she?"
she repeated. I looked from Sarah's hopeful puppy dog eyes to Miss Hatchetface's encouraging grin, to Frankenteddy's complete indifference as the sparrow continued to peck at his head. I sighed and simply said, "All right," to which Sarah responded by exploding into a chorus of cheers, seizing Frankenteddy's paws and jumping up and down like she had springs attached to the bottom of her feet. "I am not aware of what has happened, so I will simply mirror your excitement," Frankenteddy said, jumping up and down with Sarah. I noted with some pleasure that Miss Robbins regarded him with obvious distaste.
"Would you like to step inside and take a seat?"
Miss Hatchetface asked the old lady, smiling kindly at her. It seemed, however, that Miss Robbins was immune to Miss Hatchetface's considerable charm. In response, she simply shot her a dirty look and huffed her way into my house and up the stairs, her long reptilian tail flapping ridiculously on each step as she climbed. We didn't see her for the rest of the day, although there were various bangs and abhorrent smells emitting from my upstairs guest bedroom at regular intervals, and when Miss Hatchetface went in to bring her a dinner tray, Miss Robbins responded by calling her a strawberry tart and slamming the door in her face. Miss Hatchetface complained about the sour old woman for an hour straight that night, though we eventually did move on to more stimulating topics. After our discussion, I prepared to take my traditional nightly shower. Just before I stepped in, however, I realized that my towel was no longer on the rack. I opened the door to the bedroom to grab a towel from the hamper when I saw Miss Hatchetface standing hunched over in a corner, holding something cupped in her hands and speaking to it. I closed the door again until just a tiny crack remained and pressed my ear up against it. I could only just hear what she was saying.
Yes,
she whispered to whatever was in her hands.
"The old woman is here now. She's horribly unpleasant, by the way."
She paused, as if listening to something that I could not hear.
No, it's fine. He doesn't suspect a thing. Everything is going according to plan."
For the first time since meeting Miss Hatchetface, my stomach squirmed with a feeling that had nothing to do with her deep black eyes or the perpetual warmth that radiated from her skin. I pressed my ear harder against the door. She paused again, this time for longer, and I began to wonder if she might have realized that I was listening. It was then that I heard the familiar whooshing sound of something being whisked to hell, and I heard her footsteps trail off downstairs. I decided the towel could wait, and it might behoove me to go ahead and hop in the shower. When I got out, a clean, dryer-warm towel was hanging on the outside door of the bathroom. I dried myself off, and I had just finished wrapping the towel around my waist when Miss Hatchetface came back into the bedroom.
"Oh, you're finished. I was beginning to worry you drowned in there."
"Oh, no, I just like to think while I'm in the shower," I said. She laughed again, but I saw something in her eyes akin to suspicion. An awkward silence settled over the room, and we stared at each other. I cleared my throat. Did I hear you saying something to me when I was in the shower?" Miss Hatchetface's eyes widened in surprise, though whether it was feigned or genuine, I couldn't tell.
"Me? I was quiet as a mouse, just reading a book."
She motioned to the nightstand, and I saw that a book did in fact lay open there, yet the uneasy feeling did not go away. As I lay awake that night, Miss Hatchetface's chest softly rising and falling next to me, I wondered what exactly it was that I didn't suspect. Chapter 8. Netherworld Portals and Back to Hell. The next morning, I awoke in a less than stellar mood, exhausted from a night of tossing and turning. Things only got worse when I stumbled downstairs to find that my living room had been demolished. The furniture had all been unceremoniously shoved against the walls, and Miss Robbins had set a blackboard up and began scrawling bizarre satanic symbols all over it with chalk, while Sarah sat at rapt attention in a desk that looked like it had been stolen from her kindergarten. Next to Sarah's desk gaped a large black pit with burn marks all around it. Every few seconds, Frank and Teddy would throw a Cheeto fruit into it, and a large purple tentacle would shoot up from the darkness and catch it midair before slithering back down into the hole. The couch had somehow been transformed to red patent leather, and two large rounded horns had sprouted from either side. I sighed, giving the hole in the floor a wide berth, as I went to the kitchen and grabbed a beer from the fridge before plopping down on my couch. I looked up as I heard a sudden, "Hey, watch where you stick that thing!" come from beneath me.
"The couch decided it doesn't like being sat on all the time, Daddy,"
Sarah said, turning and smiling sweetly up at me. "Oh, okay. I suppose next the carpet will decide it doesn't want people to walk all over it."
"Don't be ridiculous, Daddy."
I took a big gulp of my beer. "The courage of the couch is to be commended. It has risen above its station in life, and will soon dominate the humans that once saw fit to make it their seat's slave." "What?" I began, but Miss Hatchetface cut me off.
"Have some more Cheeto fruit, Teddy. You get cranky when your blood sugar is low."
"No demon in hell has the authority to command me but Satan himself," Frank and Teddy bellowed in response.
"Have some Cheeto fruit, silly,"
Sarah said. "Okay," he replied, and with that, he lifted up the wheelbarrow of the stuff next to him and tipped it down his throat. The sparrow squawked in protest, and Miss Robbins eyed the display with snobbish displeasure.
"I don't know why Satan thought that thing was an appropriate companion for a little girl. When I was her age, I kept an evil unicorn, Strider. Now that was a proper pet."
"Are you sure it wasn't a dinosaur?" Miss Hatchetface asked, tipping her head to the side and putting on a plastic smile. Apparently, she hadn't taken it kindly when Miss Robbins had called her a strawberry tart the day before.
"And just what is that supposed to mean?"
Miss Robbins asked, swelling up like a bullfrog ready to burst. "I believe Lady Hatchetface is implying that you are old," said Frank and Teddy. He wiped some Cheeto dust on the couch, which let out a disgusted grumble. "Yet the Lady Hatchetface is approaching 17,000 years of age herself. Perhaps she is merely implying that you look extremely old."
"Yes, well, we aren't all half succubus, and..."
"Because of the wrinkles."
"Yes, I understand that my appearance..."
"And the glasses."
"Yes, well, I need my glasses too."
"And the hunchback," finished Frank and Teddy. Miss Robinson's finger began to wag dangerously in Frank and Teddy's direction, and I decided I had better intercede before there was any trouble. "So," I said a little too loudly, "what exactly are y'all learning today?"
"We are learning about the fundamentals of demonic possession, and afterwards, perhaps a lesson in etiquette for you, Darren. It is not polite to interrupt a teacher's lesson."
"Right. And what about the giant squid hole in my living room?"
"We opened a portal to the netherworld, Daddy,"
Sarah said, with the casual ease of someone explaining what they'd had for breakfast that morning.
"It's like Hell's basement. It houses all the incomprehensible beings that existed in the black void of nothingness before the creation of the universe."
"Huh," I replied, taking another large gulp of beer. Just then, a low rumbling growl emitted from the hole, shaking the picture frames off the walls and sending cracks snaking from floor to ceiling. "Could we maybe shut that?"
"We haven't learned how to shut portals yet."
Okay. I took another sip of beer, realizing that it was just air because the beer was already gone, and wandered off into the kitchen to see if I could scrounge up something resembling a human breakfast. I opened the refrigerator, and my hair blew back as a deep infernal roar erupted from within. I slammed the door shut. "Sarah!" I called out to the living room.
"Yes, Daddy?"
"Did you open a portal to the netherworld inside the refrigerator?"
"Yes, Daddy."
I sighed and rubbed my temples. As I was lamenting the destruction of my living room and kitchen, a sudden idea occurred to me on how to deal with my demonic denizens' ever-increasingly suspicious behavior. I realized that if I were to get to the bottom of this, I'd have to visit Satan. After all, it seemed illogical to assume that if there was some sort of evil scheming going on, he would be the one behind it. And of course, there was that tour of hell, where he had clearly just wanted to get rid of me so that he could talk to Sarah. And perhaps more importantly, he was also the one who buzzed me down to hell every time I called his customer service department with a complaint. At first, that had irritated me, but now I realized that it could be an opportunity for me to do some snooping. I slid my phone out of my pocket and hit the number for Hell's customer service hotline, which by now I had saved under the contact name of Instant Migraine. It was picked up after one ring, and the familiar, tired voice of the customer service representative answered. "Welcome to Hell's customer service. How may I help you today?" "You know, that joke's getting pretty old." "You don't say. Why don't you come up with something better then?" "Seems like a lot of effort." The voice on the other end sighed and mumbled something about lazy writing. "Is this Mr. Rogers again?" she asked, her tone telling me that she already knew the answer. "Yeah, I wanted to talk about a portal to the netherworld in my—" "Please hold." The line clicked, and I noted with some confusion that the hold music was the song Jingle Bells. The line clicked again, and Satan's enthusiastic voice answered, "Derek, buddy, how are things up there on Earth?" "It's Darren, and things aren't so great, given that there's a huge gaping pit to the netherworld in the middle of my living room." "Ah, well, that's no good. Is Gary down there?" "Who's Gary?" "Gary is a giant octopus whose ink is the source of the universe's dark matter." "Well, there is a giant octopus." "All right. Well, I'll send someone to close that portal up for you right away. How does Tuesday work for you?" "Satan, it's Wednesday right now." "I meant the Tuesday after next." The front of my brain began to throb with frustration. "Satan, there's a giant octopus living beneath my living room who could squirt dark matter all over my furniture at any moment. Can we talk about this face to face?" Satan's voice trailed off. "I'm a little busy right now, Derek. And don't worry, though. I'll send somebody within a few months." "What happened to You know what? Buzz me down." "All right. But I'm not at the office." I began to ask just where he was, but my voice was drowned out by the roar of the black and purple fire that swallowed me whole, sucking me down to hell like human-flavored soda through a straw. I landed hard in hell, stumbling across rusted red dirt and cracked volcanic stone as I tried and failed to regain my balance, crashing and banging my knees on the rocks. I pulled myself into a sitting position and stared around in awe at my surroundings as I wondered where I was. I sat at the edge of a sheer cliff, and below me was what looked like a colossal construction site, where giant purple-skinned behemoths hauled around girders made from the ancient yellowed bones of some even larger beasts. From my perspective on the cliff, I could see that the demons were laying down a monumental pentagram flat across an enormous expanse of blood-red sand. Torches stood at each of the 6 points, made from dark oak trees so tall and wide, they seemed as if they could have held up the earth itself. I looked up to see Satan standing beside me, eyes squinting tight as he surveyed the work, his 2 polished black horns poking through holes in a plastic canary yellow construction hat. "Hey, Derek," he said, smiling down at me. "What are you doing on the ground?" I scrambled up to my feet, made a poor job of brushing myself off, and looked at Satan. My voice trailed off. Now that the first part of my plan had actually worked, I noticed that I hadn't really given any thought to what the next part was. What are you guys building?" I asked. This? It's a park." I looked down at the enormous structure that the demons were laying down in the sand and noticed the conspicuous absence of anything remotely park-related. "It's a park in the shape of a pentagram." "Well, I mean, this is hell, Derek." "It's Darren, actually." "What's Darren?" "Never mind." "All right, Derek, but as you can see, we're a little busy down here in hell, and I can't really afford to send anyone up right now to fix the portal in your living room. Why don't you just ask Miss Robbins to do it?" "Miss Robbins knows how to do it?" I asked, momentarily forgetting that I was on a fact-finding mission. "Why didn't you just tell me that over the phone?" "Well, you seemed like you were in an awful hurry to get down here. I thought that maybe you missed me." "What?" Satan's shoulders slumped ever so slightly. "Oh, nothing. Is there anything else you need, Derek? As I've already said, I'm a little busy here." "But you're not doing anything. You're just watching other people work." "You're damn right. I'm the boss down here. And the boss's job isn't to work. It's to watch other people work and silently project the idea that they're not doing a good enough job." Anyway, I'll see you soon, Derek." "You will?" But Satan didn't respond. Instead, the familiar black and purple flames licked up around me, and I once again felt the sensation of being sucked through a straw as I was rocketed back towards Earth. I landed back in my kitchen, elbows and knees banging hard against the linoleum floor. I struggled back to my feet and saw that the portal in the living room had been sealed and that Gary the octopus was gone, although the burn marks on my carpet remained. "Satan called while you were on your way up," Sarah explained. "He told Miss Robbins to seal the hole up because you didn't like Gary. That wasn't a very nice thing to say, Daddy." "But I didn't." An infernal roar sounded from somewhere deep below the earth, shaking the frame of the house around us. "I think you hurt Gary's feelings, Daddy. You should probably apologize." My fingers once again found my temples and began massaging as I squeezed my eyes shut against the chaos that had become my life. I didn't know what to do. Not only had I come no closer to finding out what Satan was up to, but every time I turned around, a new monstrosity was invading the peaceful suburban tranquility of my home, and I still hadn't eaten breakfast. My eyes had been shut for all of 10 seconds when I heard an earth-shattering loud bellow in my ears. You appear to be suffering from a headache. Perhaps I can assist you."
Frank-N-Teddy was bent down, his face so close to mine that I could count the individual crumbs of Cheeto dust at the corners of his mouth. "No, Frank-N-Teddy, I'm just fine."
"Very well," he replied.
He turned around and opened the refrigerator door, digging through the snack drawer with reckless abandon. I was going to tell them that there were no Cheetos in there when I smelled cigarette smoke. I scanned the living room and saw that the couch had a cigarette stuck between the middle cushion and the frame and was carelessly puffing away. "Who gave the couch a cigarette?" I said. Everybody looked around the room at each other and collectively shrugged. I power-walked over to the sofa and snatched the cigarette out of its mouth, stomping it out on the already thoroughly ruined carpet. "No smoking," I said to the couch, before turning to Miss Robbins. "And as for you, I don't want to come downstairs to find any more portals to the netherworld in my living room, nor do I want to come down to find a couch that talks and is suddenly useless to sit on." Miss Robbins swelled indignantly. "My teaching methods?" "Your teaching methods are just fine if you're teaching in your own home, but as long as you are teaching here, not to mention staying in the guest bedroom, you are to follow the rules of my household, which, and I can't believe I'm actually saying this, includes a no portals to the netherworld clause." Miss Robbins glowered at me like she was a frog, and I was a stubbornly agile fly who had just danced narrowly out of her reach. Luckily, she must have decided that she was too offended for words, because she said nothing, instead storming off upstairs, her reptilian tail flapping each step as she went. "You know," the couch said, cushions flapping like a mouth, "you're useless to sit on too, but you don't hear me throwing it in your face." I decided that didn't merit a response.
"I believe that the Lady Robbins was wounded by your words," Frank-N-Teddy bellowed. "Unfortunately, I do not believe the wound to be fatal." I sighed and wondered if it was too early to grab another beer from the fridge. But first, I had something important to do. "Sarah, I'm sorry I interrupted your lesson." "It's okay, Daddy," Sarah grinned, and her bright blue eyes brimmed with careless joy. "I was ready for a break anyway. Can I go upstairs and play Tea Party with Frank-N-Teddy?"
"Of course you can, honey."
"Yay!"
Sarah squealed, streaming upstairs in a little girl-sized blur before pausing at the banister and shouting at Frank-N-Teddy.
"Come on, silly."
"Yes, Princess Sarah." I heard the stairs creak in protest as Frank-N-Teddy's immense frame lumbered up them. A moment later, Sarah strained back down the stairs, tripping over the last few steps and tumbling head over heels. She leaped back to her feet and ran over to me, shoving something in my hand. I looked down to see a golden signet ring with the letters BFF on it. "What's this?" "It's a super BFF friendship ring. I've got one too, see?" She waved her hand in my face, and I saw that she did indeed have an identical golden ring, only several sizes smaller. "Miss Robbins gave them to me. All you have to do is put the ring on and rub it, and it'll instantly transport you to wherever I am. Cool, right?" I stared down at the ring in wonder. It was more than just cool, it was a single father's dream. I smiled at Sarah and said, "Yeah, it's cool." I slid the oversized ring onto my finger, and it instantly shrunk down to a perfect fit. "Thank you, honey. I love you." "I love you too, Daddy," she giggled before shooting back upstairs to her tea party with Frank-N-Teddy. Miss Hatchetface came up and placed her hand gently on my elbow. "How is your head, Mr. Rogers?" "It's okay," I lied.
"Are you sure? And maybe I could make you a snack and that would—"
"No," I shouted out reflexively.
Miss Hatchetface's eyes widened in surprise. I just meant, My mind stalled as it searched for an excuse. I'll feel better once I get this mess cleaned up in the living room.
Oh, okay. I'll help.
We made our way over to the miniature mock classroom, Miss Hatchetface to the blackboard, and me to the desk. Miss Hatchetface lifted the blackboard over her head and began carrying it towards the garage, but I didn't touch the desk. I was looking at what was on it. Sarah's notebook lay open. The page she had been taking notes on had been ripped out, but there was something familiar in the indentations that had been left on the next one. I took the pencil she had left on the desk and began to edge it lightly over the grooves in the paper. When I had finished, I was staring at something I'd definitely seen before. 5 minutes ago, in fact. A large pentagram dominated the page, with little archaic symbols scrawled into the gaps. It was the exact same shape as a monument I'd seen, under construction in hell. Chapter 9. The Ritual of a Mud Magar. I stared at the page I'd torn off in my hand, trying to work out what it could possibly mean. Suddenly, I heard a rustling from behind me, and Miss Hatchetface's voice said,
"Do you need some help with that, Mr. Rogers?"
I crumpled the paper in my fist and quickly stuffed it in my pocket.
"What was that?"
she asked. "It was a cute drawing Sarah did in class," I lied.
"That's lovely,"
Miss Hatchetface smiled, but the joy didn't quite touch her eyes. Resting there was the same look I'd seen the night before, a look quite similar to suspicion.
"Well, I'll just get that desk for you then,"
she said, stepping around me and lifting the school desk as if it were nothing. I watched her carry the desk off to the garage before sliding the paper out of my pocket once again. I pulled out my cell phone camera and took a picture, then stuffed the paper back in my pocket, resolving to get rid of the evidence that I'd been snooping later. As I was doing that, something else caught my eye. The TV remote to Minor Inconveniences lay on the coffee table. I grabbed the little black remote with purple buttons and stuffed it in my pocket as well, thinking it may come in handy. I stood there in the middle of the living room, waiting for Miss Hatchetface to return so that I could try my best to act natural, but she didn't come. Confused, I went back to the garage to investigate. I put my ear up to the door, but all I could hear was a faint murmuring. I edged the remote out of my pocket, scanning it to see if there was something that might help me to hear her better. My eyes roved over the many buttons, taking in things like flaming burps, 2 left feet, and a hairy tongue, before finally settling on the button I needed, a button I'd seen Sarah use on Frank and Teddy once before, Dumbo mode. I took a hard swallow in anticipation of what I knew the remote was going to do to me, pointed it at my head, and pressed the button. Instantly, I felt a disturbing sensation. My ears had become not quite numb, and it felt like someone with soft, gloved hands was pulling on them and stretching them like silly putty. I felt my left ear and discovered that it was now roughly 2 times the size of my head. I pressed it to the door. The indistinct murmurs had now become hushed whispers, quiet, but clear enough to make out.
I keep telling you we should have these conversations in hell,"
came Miss Hatchetface's urgent whisper. I strained my ears, listening for another voice, but there was none.
"I think he's starting to suspect something. I told you not to send that old woman."
There was another gap in the conversation as Miss Hatchetface listened to whomever it was she was speaking with.
Yes, I told you she's almost ready. I've never seen anyone learn the magic so fast. You must have been right about her. Just get construction done on your end."
There was another long silence, and then the shuffling of feet walking towards the door. I darted back into the living room as quickly and as silently as I could, padding up the stairs as I fumbled with the remote of Minor Inconveniences, trying to stuff it back into my pocket. I was almost to the top when I ran into a fuzzy brick wall in the form of Frank and Teddy. Time slowed as I began to fall backwards over the stairs, and wondered if they'd be able to shrink my ears back down after I died from a broken neck. But I didn't die. Instead, an enormous furry paw reached out and grabbed me by the front of my shirt, yanking me roughly back to my feet. My ears wobbled ridiculously as I slowed to a stop. "Pardon me, Lord Rogers," Frankenteddy's voice boomed. "It's okay, really. I just need to get by so that I can—" "It seems that you have altered your appearance," Frankenteddy droned on, oblivious to my wincing at his every word. "A wise decision. Your nose looks much smaller compared to your new ears." Wait. What's wrong with my nose?" "There is nothing wrong with it. It is glorious and noble, like my father's nose." "Oh, well that's—" "He was a Toucan Sam doll." "Right. Thanks, Frankenteddy." I heard a delicate throat clear, and I turned to see Miss Hatchetface standing at the foot of my stairs. "Oh my!" she said, her voice choked and strained as she tried to hold back her laughter. "What happened to your ears, Mr. Rogers?" "I just got to fooling around with the remote. Do you know how to reverse it?" "Just hit the previous channel button," she said, laughing. I pointed the remote at my head and did as she said. My ears shrunk down, but then I heard the sound of ripping fabric, and there was a peculiar sensation I'd never felt before. It felt like... "Miss Hatchetface?" "Yes, Mr. Rogers?" "Do I have a pig's tail?" "Yes, Mr. Rogers." "How do I get rid of it?" "Hit the mute button." "Thank you." I pointed the remote at myself and hit the mute button. This time I felt the pig's tail disappear, replaced by a slight breeze through the hole it had left in my pants. "Your appearance has been restored to normal. Your nose is once again the glorious apex of your face." "Thank you, Frankenteddy. Now, if you don't mind letting me through, I need to go upstairs to my office and get some work done." "Of course, Lord Rogers." Frankenteddy stepped to the side, and with some difficulty I managed to squeeze past him. I went into the study and pulled up my laptop, opened the web browser, and began scouring the internet for information about the pentagram I'd found. I pored over dozens of websites, ranging from the encyclopedic to the psychotic. Finally, after 4 hours and 3 cups of coffee, I found what I was looking for. The website was down a link rabbit hole, the web address a long string of random letters and numbers. It was a kind of website that search engines don't index, that you can only get to by following link after link haphazardly until you stumble upon it accidentally. But somehow, I had found it. It looked as if it hadn't been touched in years, like one of those old blog websites from the mid-90s. There was only one page, and no other explanation except for the blood-red letters that peeled out of the solid black background, and a photo of the pentagram I had now saved in my phone. I leaned in closely, and I could see the light from the computer screen illuminating my reflection as I scanned the article. This is what it said. The Ritual of a Mudmagar. The Ritual of a Mudmagar is the most ancient and powerful of all satanic rites. It is a type of portal magic that acts on the barrier between the dimensions of hell and earth. The barrier is impenetrable from the side of hell, but it is not flawless. At certain places on earth, places where great evil has occurred, there exist tiny cracks just large enough for the souls of the damned to pass through. An act of extreme evil may even allow for demons to send a piece of their souls through the cracks and haunt those who visit such places. The Ritual of a Mudmagar works to widen these cracks, so that larger demonic souls may escape back up to Earth's surface. This rite is only theoretical and has never been used, as it requires the Dark Lord Satan himself to perform it in hell. It's said that if the ritual is performed in concert with Satan's direct descendant on Earth, the Dark Lord himself may return. And then I heard a voice behind me. "Hello, Darren. I whirled around in my office chair to see Miss Robbins standing in the open doorway, those ancient and hateful yellow eyes glowering at me over her thick fishbowl lenses. "How did you get in here? The door was locked." Miss Robbins only clicked her tongue and moved closer to me. "You're not going to stop Satan from taking over this planet," she said, wagging a finger at me. "You're too late. The ritual has already begun." Two thoughts went through my head at that point. The first was that Miss Robbins looked more like a frog than ever, and the second was that I still had the remote to minor inconveniences stuffed inside my back pocket. Before any more thoughts had time to flicker across my consciousness, I yanked it out of my pocket and began mashing buttons randomly as I pointed it at Miss Robbins. "What?" she said in surprise. Her protests were stifled as a blast of silver light hit her directly in the tongue, which swelled to monstrous proportions, flopping out of her mouth and down onto the ground. She yelled at me, hurling a ball of green fire directly at my head. I ducked just in time, and the fire shattered off the wall behind me, sending off little green sparks that ignited the carpet wherever they landed. I seized the office chair and hurled it at her, and as she ducked, I managed to pound a couple more buttons. The first blast missed and hit the wall, causing a huge patch of wavy purple hair to erupt through the shattered pieces of what had been my office, but the second blast struck her right in the stomach, sending her toppling over backwards, covered in orange and silver feathers. She sprang back to her feet with surprising agility, heaving a black blob of oil at me that I deflected into the wall of my laptop. I dropped the laptop when I realized that the dozen little oily hands had grown out of it and began reaching out to grab me. I hit her with one last blast of bright golden light, and she burst into laughter. At first I thought she was mocking me, until I looked down to see that I'd hit the little purple button shaped like a hand that read, "Tickle Fit" underneath. Triumphant and merciless, I marched towards her, mashing the volume button over and over again. Her laughter first became uproarious gales, and then thunderous shrieks as I tormented her. Distracted by my task, I became aware of two things far too late. The first was that beneath the tempest shrieks of Miss Robbins' laughter, my stairs were screaming in protest as heavy feet took them two at a time, and the second was that a bit of green fire had dripped down from the ceiling of my study and landed directly on my head, and in 2 seconds, my hair would be entirely engulfed in flames. The culmination of those two events came at the same time. Frank and Teddy appeared in the doorway of my study, and I felt the white-hot fire as it touched my scalp. "You are on fire!" Frank and Teddy roared, as he hurdled the shrieking Miss Robbins and raced towards me. "Allow me to pat it out." "Frank and Teddy, no!" But my cry went unheeded, and darkness enveloped me as Frank and Teddy's humongous paw came crashing down on the top of my head. I awoke an indeterminate time later in my own bed, the faces of Sarah and my demonic family staring down at me. I noted with pleasure that Miss Robbins and Satan were both absent among them. I reached up to feel my scalp and breathed a sigh of relief when I felt hair there. That relief fizzled out, though, when I saw that the few loose strands that came off in my hand were wavy and purple. Miss Hatchetface's face wrinkled up in concern. "Are you okay, Mr. Rogers?" she asked. "Yeah, I'm okay now." "Well, that's good," a familiar voice said from behind me. "You gave us quite a scare there, Derek." I tilted my head up to see Satan grinning down at me. Oh, no. Chapter 10. The First Apocalypse. I closed my eyes and rubbed my aching head, trying to remember how things had spiraled so far out of control. It had all started with an innocuous typo in a letter and somehow devolved to the point that I was having my very own private apocalypse in my living room. Look, Satan, I don't know why you're here on Earth, but can it wait? Now's not really a good time for me to be caught up in the apocalypse. I'm trying to put the finishing touches on my next book. Well, I could come back after you finished, but I was hoping to get out of hell before it froze over, said Satan. I sighed. If you were going to show up uninvited, you could have at least given me a warning first. I thought you'd be happy to see me, Satan replied, with a feigned hurt in his voice. Satan, in the short time I've known you, you've turned my house into a zoo, and my daughter into a conduit for satanic magic. Why would I be happy to see you? Satan rubbed his chin. Well, first off, who doesn't like the zoo? Frankenteddy cleared his throat. Ah, right. Sorry, forgot about the whole bear thing. But seriously, Derek, your daughter was already... Miss Hatchetface elbowed him in the ribs and he stopped talking. Look, if you want to take over the world, I can't stop you, but you can't stay here while you do it. And take over the world? I'm the CEO of Hell Corp. Why would I want to take over this dump? Miss Robbins said you were going to take over the Earth. And you believed that, old bat? She was just trying to get your goat, Derek. That's how she is. I do not understand how a goat is involved, interjected Frankenteddy. We both paused, looked at him, and then turned back to each other and continued as if he hadn't said anything. Okay, then if you're not here to take over the planet, then why are you here? Well, being the CEO of Hell is stressful. Besides overseeing daily operations, I have to liaise with Earth politicians and corporate lawyers. I needed a vacation, so I decided to come up here and take my daughters to Disneyland. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I know. Why would anyone come to Earth to visit Disneyland when the theme parks in Hell are so much better? But you have to understand that riding the blood luge for the billionth time is a little uninspiring. Know what I mean? Not even a little, I said. I sighed and squeezed my eyes shut, rubbing the lids until little fireworks exploded onto the black canvas of my vision. Fine, let's go to Disneyland, I guess. There we have it. It's just a nice, wholesome family trip to Disneyland. There's no evil, ulterior motive or anything like that. I'm ready when everyone else is, Satan said, clapping his hands together and grinning. You mean now? Yeah, the cab's waiting outside, Daniel. We all packed while you were unconscious. My name's not Daniel, it's... But my head went all fuzzy when I tried to think of my name. Oh, boy. Frankenteddy really did a number on you, huh? And don't worry about it. I've got a great doctor down in Hell. He'll fix you right up. He can even take that nose down a couple of sizes while he's at it. He's famous up here. You probably heard of him. Really? What's his name? Dr. Mengele. No thanks, Satan. Okay, Daniel, whatever you say. Before I knew it, the suitcases were being tossed into the van that had pulled up in front of my house, and we were all piling in like demonic sardines in a can. All of us except Miss Robbins. I didn't bother to ask where she had gone. Miss Hatchetface was wearing a long black skirt that hid her tail, and Satan had put on a tuxedo and a cowboy hat, insisting that this made him look like a typical human being. Frankenteddy, meanwhile, had been forced to don an enormous fuzzy brown teddy bear costume as a disguise. I look ridiculous, he said, as he dropped himself into the van's back row of seats. The van tipped to the side under his weight. But you were already a teddy bear. If anything, you just look cute now, I said. It is not my mission objective to be cute. The taxi driver eyed us in the rearview mirror. Heavy bags hung under wary eyes.
Are you guys going to some sort of convention or something?
We are escorting the offspring of Satan to the magical land of Dizzy, bellowed Frankenteddy.
You're what now? Don't listen to him. We're just a normal American family going on our weekly trip to Disneyland.
Right. Hey, wait a second, Satan. Didn't you say we were bringing along your daughters? Where are they? Satan tugged on his collar.
They're waiting for us at the park. Don't worry about it.
Miss Hatchetface cocked her head to the side and gave him a quizzical look, but she didn't say anything. The van pulled out of the driveway, and soon we were on the road in earnest. Satan and Sarah sat in the van's middle row of seats, while Miss Hatchetface was squeezed into the back seat between Frankenteddy and me. We had wanted to put someone in the front of our seat, but the cab driver had insisted that he needed that seat for his golf clubs. He even moved them out of the trunk to put them there. We had only been on the road for about 15 minutes when a thought suddenly occurred to me.
Hold on a second, I said, turning to Miss Hatchetface. Why are we taking a cab? I can just drive us.
She smiled at me.
Do you remember what your name is yet?
Of course I do. It's, But my head went all fuzzy again when I tried to think of my name. What is my name? I asked.
Your name is Mr. Sillyhead,
said Sarah, giggling. She turned around and squinted her bright blue eyes in a huge grin. Frankenteddy turned his big fake head towards me. I was not aware of your new name. Apologies, Lord Sillyhead. Satan didn't answer the question. He was too busy leaning over the back of the front passenger side seat and grinning widely at the driver, asking him questions like, "How did you get your skin so tight?" And, "What exactly is the function of a sphincter?" I felt Miss Hatchetface's warm hand close over mine. "Your name is Darren?" she said. Her big black eyes shone like ink-colored jewels. "My name is Darren," I repeated. After that, I must have lost some time, because the next thing I remember, we were pulling over at a rest stop. "Gotta fill up the tank," the driver explained. "We won't be making any more stops between here and Disneyland, so if you want to grab some drinks or snacks, now would be the time." We all climbed out of the van and stretched our legs. "I'm heading inside to hit the John. Can somebody watch the pump?" A quick look around confirmed that everybody else had used the restroom too, except for Frankenteddy. "My body does not require urination to function," he boomed. The driver looked confused, but seemed to be in quite a hurry to use the bathroom himself, and so he decided letting Frankenteddy watch the pump was worth the risk. We headed inside to the toilets, and afterwards grabbed some peach rings and sunflower seeds. When we got up to the checkout counter, Sarah turned to me and said, "You should ask Frankenteddy if he wants something to drink." "Oh, that's a good idea." I opened the door and leaned out to call to Frankenteddy, but I stopped dead when I saw what he was doing. He had taken the nozzle out of the gas tank of the car and stuck it in his mouth so that it was shooting gasoline down his throat. I burst through the door of the convenience store and sprinted to the car. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded. Frankenteddy turned off the gas and dropped the nozzle. "I wish to taste the warrior's elixir of this fearsome metal beast. It is a potent drink indeed." "You can't drink gasoline. You're gonna explode." "By what treacherous sorcery may this divine beverage cause me to explode?" he asked. "It's gasoline. The entire point is that it does explode. That's how the car runs. It's a combustion engine." Frankenteddy paused for a moment. You mean to tell me that this beast is powered by explosions?" "Well, more or less." "This is joyous news. news. I shall inform Satan so that he may bring a pair down to hell at once to begin breeding. Okay, just go spit the gas out. Frank and Teddy turned his head and belched out a 30-foot spurt of flames. I have disposed of the gasoline. Yeah, you have, I said, as my heart fluttered weakly in my chest. Good job. The cashier of the convenience store, a balding man in his late 40s with a comb-over and a bulbous beer gut, ran outside and waddle-sprinted to the pumps. What the hell was that? He demanded. Frank and Teddy approached him and placed a paw upon his shoulder. That was a demonstration of the power of Satan's future demonic cavalry, small human. But there is no need for you to fear. We do not mean you any harm. The cashier squirmed his way out from under Frank and Teddy's paw and looked at me. Is he off his meds or something? Sorry about that. He's not from around here. Why don't we go inside and I'll pay for those snacks? With a sidelong glance at Frank and Teddy, the cashier turned on his heel and we walked inside together. Sarah had grabbed 5 extra bags of candy while I was outside, and I was too exhausted to put up a fight when she plopped them down on the counter. She hugged me around the waist and said, I love you, Daddy. And I kissed her on top of her head and said, I love you too. We locked our hands together and headed back to the parking lot to see the driver had finally returned from the bathroom and was staring at the gas pump with a frown. Sorry about that. I'll pay for it. The driver shook his head and muttered something rude sounding under his breath before climbing back in the driver's seat. We all clambered back into the car. I noticed that Miss Hatchetface was already inside. Have you been here the whole time? I asked. More or less. If that's true, then why didn't you stop Frank and Teddy from drinking gasoline? Miss Hatchetface went pale. You mean you don't drink gasoline on Earth? Of course not. Oh no, I've been putting it in your breakfast. That actually explains a lot. The cab driver was giving us the stink eye as he pulled out of the lot and back onto the open road. I turned and watched the scenery flit by in a blur of pastel greens and browns. Before I knew it, the monotony of the barren countryside had lulled me into a deep sleep. Chapter 11. Disneyland. The next thing I remember is rolling up on the gates of Disneyland and spilling out of the van. Judging by the looks we were getting, we must have been the oddest group of tourists to have ever darkened the magical kingdom's doorstep. The cab driver seemed like he was in a hurry to be rid of us. He nearly slammed the door on Satan's arm when Satan opened it to give him a tip. The driver took one look at Satan's outstretched palm and peeled out of the lot, muttering an impressive stream of curse words along with every possible pseudonym of the word lunatic. What did I do? Satan asked innocently. He held out his upturned palm. Are those human finger bones? I asked. Well, of course. We don't use that as money here, Satan. Oh, well, where can I exchange it for human money? Try the police station. Nice try, Jerry. I shrugged. People pointed and whispered as we passed, shrinking away from us as if our craziness might be contagious. And before I knew it, we were at the front of the line. The Disneyland employee selling tickets was a young, pimply-faced teenager with braces and close-cropped blonde hair. His mouth hung open so low when he saw us that I thought his tongue might fall out onto the counter. How many? He asked. The 742 offspring of Satan demand entry into the magical land of Dizzy, Frank and Teddy bellowed. Also, us 5. What? Coughed the teenager. Satan tugged at his collar and grinned at the kid in the ticket booth, swirling his finger in a circle around his temple, in the international sign for crazy. Hold on, Satan. Didn't you say your daughters would be waiting for us?
They're, already in the park. Did you just call him Satan? The kid asked. Satan's just my nickname, Satan responded. He threw the kid a wink and said, You can call me Mr. Satan. Just take the tickets, the kid said, thrusting them under the slot in the counter window. But I didn't give you any money. That's okay. This one's on me. Wow, what a nice young man, Satan said, and turning to us and handing out the tickets. He turned back to the terrified ticket seller and grinned. I know you're not allowed to accept tips, but we'll keep this one just between us two. He then slid the finger bones under the slot in the glass. The ticket seller's eyes blew up to the size of golf balls, but Satan paid him no mind. Grinning, he turned back to us. All right, you guys go on and have some fun. I need to go handle some business. Without waiting for our responses, he turned on his heel and strode off into the park at a brisk pace. Miss Hatchetface stared at Satan's back as he left, and a little wrinkle appeared between her eyebrows. I wonder what Satan's daughters look like, I said to no one in particular. What? Replied Miss Hatchetface. I said Frank and Teddy, said Miss Hatchetface, cutting me off. Yes, Lady Hatchetface. Can you take care of Darren and Sarah for a bit? I need to go check on something. I am honored that the lady would entrust me with such a... my lady? I have not finished speaking. But Miss Hatchetface either didn't hear or didn't care, because she was already 20 feet away, a silk skirt swishing around her hips as she hurried after Satan. Sarah looked up at me and grinned. I want to ride all the rides, she squealed. I shrugged. Sounds like a plan to me. I hope they have the blood luge, Frank and Teddy bellowed, unaware that his voice was about as loud as a jet engine with a nasty cough. People fixed us with terrified gazes, and I ushered Frank and Teddy and Sarah into the park. We went to the food court first and bought some absurdly overpriced snacks before heading to the first ride. A rather mild adventure in which you spun around in circles while sitting in giant teacups. But when we got to the front of the line, Frank and Teddy was in for a severe disappointment. Apparently, 7.5 feet tall and half as wide is a bit too big for a teacup. What do you mean I am not permitted to ride? He roared at the cowering teenage ride operator. The kid looked like he wanted to melt into the ground. It's really a safety requirement, sir, due to your size, he stammered. If I am too small for your ride, then I shall enlarge myself. Enlarge? I shall enhance my size. It's okay, Frank and Teddy, I said, smiling and patting him on the arm. I'll take Sarah and you can wait here with the nice employee. The employee looked rather sick at the prospect of spending more time with Frank and Teddy. Can we get ice cream after? Of course we can. I want a blood-flavored snow cone. At this, the ride attendant turned so white that even his pimples weren't red anymore. Sarah and I left Frank and Teddy there and climbed on board our teacup, and the ride began. Sarah screamed with joy the entire time, and when we got off, she was hopping around me in circles, hair askew and sticking to her face. That was the best ride, Daddy, she squealed. Can we go again? I almost said yes before I spotted Frank and Teddy. He was sitting on the ground with legs splayed out in front of him, staring directly at the teenage employee who he still towered over even while sitting down.
I couldn't see the expression on his face through the teddy bear costume, but I'd guessed that he was seething with anger, and the teenage employee looked a moments away from fainting. We'd better go get some ice cream first, because Frankenteddy looks like he's about to kill the Disneyland employee. We had only taken a few steps in that direction, however, when our ears were assaulted by the shriek of microphone feedback blaring from the park's PA system. My ears were still ringing when I heard a familiar voice come through all the speakers of the park at once.
Ah, well, hello, ladies and gentlemen,
said Satan's amplified voice. Park goers froze where they stood.
We at Disneyland have a special treat for you today.
And just then, Miss Hatchetface sprinted up to us. Little beads of sweat dotted her forehead, and her hair looked as if it had just attempted to fly away. I tried to stop him, she gasped out, taking big heaving breaths between each word. He's going to... But she ran out of breath before she could finish. Satan's voice continued on, bouncing off the walls of the park.
For some time, we have been considering an interdimensional partnership with our colleagues in hell,
he said.
However, due to some problems during the negotiation, we decided to simply give the park to Satan and his demons. Isn't that exciting news?
The patrons of the park stared around in all directions, mouths hanging open in slack disbelief, as Satan's voice continued on.
So, if you don't want to participate in the grand opening of the very first hellscape on Earth, I suggest you leave within the next 10 seconds.
I half expected there to be a mad stampede for the gate, but people just stood there dumbstruck, looking around as if some rational explanation would suddenly spring out of the hedges. What did spring out of the hedges, though, wasn't an explanation, nor was it rational. I heard the screams before I saw reason for them. Big purple behemoths had begun bursting out from beneath the cobblestone streets, sending tiny shards of pavement whizzing by like shrapnel. Little leathery creatures zoomed about like oversized mosquitoes on rainbow-colored wings. Sarah screamed as a 30-foot snake slithered past us, then screamed again when the snake came back to ask us where the bathroom was. The purple-skinned behemoths smashed into the rides with huge stone clubs, and the air was filled with clouds of dust, splinters of wood, and chips of shattered brick. The ground all around us cracked like a humongous egg, and new rides exploded forth. Gigantic tangled masses of ancient yellow bone and twisted metal. And purple flames erupted around the gates, erasing any hopes for escape. The windows of the mock castle at the center of the park exploded with red fire, and the brown stone spires became scaled with obsidian spikes and shot towards the sky like giant talons of some huge beast. The doors to the castle burst open, and a yawning cavern of darkness was revealed within. The insides of the cavern began to glow orange, and a loathsome feeling of dread seemed to emanate from within. People scattered like pool balls after a break, tripping over themselves, and running into the walls. The intercom screeched again, and suddenly the park went still, as we all paused to listen to the voice of Tina, Satan's secretary.
Can Mr. Darren Rogers please report to Satan's office? It's located in room 1A on the first floor of the castle,
Tina said in her tired, droning voice.
I repeat, can Mr. Darren Rogers please report to Satan's office? Thank you.
I could feel the color drain from my face as the others all turned to look at me. I swallowed hard around the knot that had formed in my throat, thinking that whatever Satan had in store for me, it most likely wasn't good. But then I felt small fingers intertwine with mine and squeeze. I looked down to see Sarah smiling up at me.
Don't be scared, Daddy. I'll go with you.
I smiled back down at her, and we started off toward the office together. Hey everybody, Kevin here from Nightmares Nightly. If you made it this far, I want to thank you all for listening. I also want to take a minute to let everybody know that I'm going to be setting up a YouTube membership page soon that I hope to bring videos to every week. If you'd like to support me and the channel, please consider signing up for that, or my Patreon page, where I'll soon be uploading content as well. I'd like to give a huge shout out to my current patrons, Ashley, Mars, Amy, and Zarin Ray, for supporting me in what I do. And as always, thanks for listening, everybody.